Hello world, Virgil here with Crazy Cyber signing on, and today we are going to be continuing the fabrication series for Hulk, my dual AMD EPYC 7551 XMRig miner build. Hopefully I can just start calling it Hulk soon because yeah, that's a mouthful. If you are new to the channel, or a returning viewer who's not subscribed yet, you should consider subscribing. I have a ton of new content on the way, both with this series, a workstation build, got some new Flipper Zero content on the way, as well as a bunch of ethical hacking content coming very soon. So let's get into it, part 2. So in part 1, we began the fabrication process and got to the point that you see right here. We have a functional skeleton of the open chassis. There are several other components that we need to fabricate in order for this chassis to fully function as a chassis. In order to complete the fab process, I need to come up with mounts for the power supply, the freeze mod, integrated pump reservoir, as well as the radiator. So for the power supply, I picked up this prefab plate off of Amazon. If you're doing a custom case build, I'll link this. It was extremely cheap. I think it was only something like $9. So this bracket right here, it is an ATX to SFX mounting adapter. And since we do have an ATX power supply, we're going to have to modify this plate here in order for it to work for our purposes. The mounting holes of the ATX power supply are these outer ones here. So this part here ends up blocking the AC adapter. So we're going to need to modify this in order to get it to work. But luckily it is steel, so it is weldable with the other steel. So the idea for this plate is the power supply connectors on the motherboard are going to end up right around here somewhere. So the idea for this plate is to have it sit something like that, tucked off to the side, and we might even drop it lower and go off this bottom branch because we don't want to have a ton of extra cables to hide. And guys, please bear in mind that this is nowhere near finished, so I know it's super rough right now, but I promise you when I'm done, it's going to look awesome. But that's the idea, and the reason that we're going to do this is because the CPU connectors are on this side, and the other connectors we need to plug stuff into are down here. So everything that really needs to get plugged in is on the right side already. So we're going to be going on the right side with the power supply. And we're going to be mounting it, quote unquote, upside down, so that the cables are going to be coming from the top here and go just loop around. And that way we should be able to have everything mount really clean and be able to do cable management effectively and efficiently. And obviously, in addition to that, the power supply will be hidden from view behind the motherboard. So for the radiator, right here, it's our EPYC copper radiator, available on crazycyber.com. So this will also be mounted at the rear of the chassis. But I'm not 100% sure as of this exact moment on exactly how I'm going to mount this. I have some general ideas on solutions to mount it and secure it, obviously. But I'm not 100% sure on which one I'm going to go with. As I begin to build and mock stuff up and see how stuff looks and will connect, that process will narrow down the possible options pretty significantly. But for right now, the solution is going to be to create basically like a stand for it on the backside. And the tubes will be on the bottom to give ourselves more tubing so we have more time to cool the coolant. And right now the solution is like I said, it's going to be to create like a stand on the backside and then have two posts come off the top of either these two or just take them both off of one. And then have a 3D printed bracket, or basically like a strap kind of, but that will secure to the steel with magnets that will secure the radiator in place. And obviously we'll use neodymium magnets. We'll get some, some pretty strong magnets just to make sure that with any of the movement from the fans and the centrifugal force from those, it won't shake it off or topple it out or anything that would be disastrous to the hardline tubing. So that's most likely how we're going to be moving along with the radiator. Now, if you look, I don't know if you can tell, but the radiator is almost the same size as the motherboard. It will be hidden, but if you come up close on it, you will be able to see it from behind. Whereas the power supply, like even if you're standing here, you won't be able to see the power supply itself. You'll only be able to see the cables coming back. So that's the general idea for the radiator. Now, the pump, that is going to be the most challenging of any of these components in order to mount and hide. Because I want the pump to appear kind of like it's just floating alongside the case. And in order to accomplish that, I'll need to get pretty creative with the solution and the welding for that. As of now, I am going to be attempting to utilize the included mounting bracket that came with the pump. But as you saw in my last video, it doesn't really fit. So I might be slicing off this bottom part, which is fine for our needs, but that does not leave me with a lot of surface material to weld to. So I do have a piece of flat stock in the garage from another project, and most likely I'll be spanning the gap with that flat stock, welding the bracket to that. And then that way I can really kind of, make this appear to just be floating, because if you look at it straight on, right, it will kind of come from the flat stock where my finger is and just go right to one of these posts. And that will kind of create the illusion that it's floating. If you just come up on it and look, because you won't be able to see the tubing from just looking straight on. It will be hidden behind the pump itself. So I really like the idea for that solution and just utilizing what came with it as well as just welding. But I am kind of also exploring the option of creating a 3D printed bracket that has posts come out of here, and then that will attach with magnets. However, I'm not quite sure on that, especially with the weight of the pump while it's full of coolant, as well as there is going to be some force acting on this reservoir with the pump in motion. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a good solution. As we begin to fabricate and just to test, I'm also going to fill this with liquid to get an idea of the weight, and then we'll weigh it and take a look at some magnets and their rated strength and see if it's a viable solution. But at this current point in time, I'm really leaning forward towards utilizing this bracket, because I think that a 3D printed bracket, the 3D printing stuff, in order for it to look good, is really going to take a lot of fab. Well, I guess you wouldn't say fab. You'd say like post-print processing. You're going to have to sand it, paint it, all that stuff. And we are already going to be doing a ton of sanding with this guy right here. So I'm really not super keen on that solution. But it is something I'm going to just consider and take a look at, because you can make 3D printed stuff look really cool. And I think it's worth the time to see, what's out there and how I could make it look good. So now the very last thing that I need to consider is that LCD metric screen that's going to be mounted underneath the motherboard. And obviously that's going to display critical information about the system's performance. It's also going to be necessary because most of the time this miner is just going to sit on this desk, which my regular workstation is right to my right here. I got two desks. And that's going to be kind of necessary because most of the time, my workstation is going to be plugged into my display. And the only time that this is really going to be plugged into a display, well, it's always going to be plugged into the display. I would just change the input, but it's really only going to be up on the screen for the initial setup, as well as setting up GPU packs and XMRig and, you know, making sure all that stuff's mining properly. And that screen is going to be crucial because instead of having to like change the input on my monitor and stop what I'm doing, I'll be able to quickly glance over and see what's going on. As well as the specific screen I'm getting, I can actually convert it to be a mini secondary monitor. And I'm hoping there will be some function on the screen that will allow me to toggle back and forth pretty quickly. And that way I'll be able to see my mining information on the screen as well. And not only that, but it is a crucial aesthetic part of this build. I have that in the initial concept sketches. If you see right here, you can see it's down on the bottom. And right here on the screen, I'll go ahead and show the monitor I bought, which is going to be here in a couple days. That I will also link down in the description for anybody interested. It does not use 8064, which in my book is a massive plus. 8064 can Dougal some sauce for all I care about. Alright, well now that you know the obstacles that we're going to be tackling in this video, let's go get to doing some bad welds and then a lot of sanding. Okay guys, we are back in the garage and we are about to start the complex and exciting process of finishing up the fabrication on the open chassis. So I have all of my equipment here, and real quick I just wanted to show you guys the materials that I purchased for this part of the build. So right here I have some 1/4 inch hot steel, and I believe some 3/8 inch or 5/16 inch steel. And I got the two different sizes because one, this can be bent by hand, which is going to be super crucial in making things line up well, and just the fabrication process will be a lot easier with things that we can bend instead of having to weld. This one I will not be able to bend. I probably could if I heated it up red hot and then bent it, but in order to really make the kind of aesthetic appeal that I want, I think some of it being bent will look really nice. And in addition to that, it's just going to cut down on the processing, I guess, of the case, all the sanding and the smoothing, the kind of the aesthetic stuff, the finishing, if you will. Because anytime I weld, I have to grind and sand, and if I can just bend it, save me a lot of time. Because right here, this is 100% going to have to be welded because the power supply is rather heavy. Definitely heavier than the empty radiator, but probably maybe not when it's full. Now, the freeze mount pump, as I mentioned before, that's going to be the most challenging part of this build. Because as I mentioned, we're going to want to make it look like it's floating. And it really does need to end up somewhere around there, but obviously we're going to have it up off the ground. The first CPU inlet is going to sit right here, so it kind of needs to be a little bit off to the side. And even with it being off to the side, we're going to have to make some relatively tight bends, depending on how I set up the Y fitting and how the tube is ran. We're trying to avoid any, crazy sharp bends. All right, well, as you can see, we have a ton, and I mean a ton of finishing work to do. But luckily, everything is solid. None of this is going anywhere. None of this is going to break off. So realistically, all we have to do with the grinding is just get it down to a point that I can then put body filler or the epoxy over top of it, which can then be sanded smooth and flat and shaped a lot easier than this metal can. And I've already showed you guys, that's the epoxy metal, and that is just the regular 2-stage epoxy to secure the motherboard to the chassis. So let's get into how I'm thinking about doing this power supply mount. Just a quick note, guys, I told you I was going to clean the garage. Your boy does what he says he's going to do. Ducati. These are the fans that I found that fit this radiator. I really couldn't find any other fans that did. And in the process of doing this, I ordered these components from AliExpress, and I could not find any good looking fans on there that fit this radiator. And a lot of them that said, I measured the distance between the holes. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I want to say it was like 70 millimeters or like 80 millimeters or something like that. But anyway, I measured it and I ordered like literally like 3 or 4 sets of fans for it, and none of them fit until I ordered these ones. And these are kind of like the type of fans that you would see on a 3D printer, like an Ender 3. So I was trying to figure out a solution in order to power them, and I ordered this board here. It's SATA powered, and it does have the 2-pin connectors here for the fans. So that's what I'm going to be using to power the fans. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I want to find a solution on the back of the motherboard where this can be placed. Most likely it'll have to be somewhere up here. So we're going to come up with a solution for that as well. So now let's really start getting into the fab process. I'm going to tape everything up and then we're going to get to it. Guys, here's our blue painter's tape. Now we're going to just begin with the components. Now, I could have probably grabbed the bolts for these, but instead I'm just going to tape them around together. And then we'll figure out, obviously the fans can be rotated to change where the wires are output. But for right now, I'm back from Ace Hardware, and this is what I got right here. It's 1/2 inch by 1/8 inch thick, 1/2 inch wide, and this should be a lot more sturdy than that prefab mount that I got off Amazon. I think that was probably a 16th or maybe even a 32nd. It was very thin, so this is going to be a lot more sturdy. So what I'm going to do with this is, wait one second. What we're going to do with this is basically just come along and cut it and then build the square, weld that all up, and then we'll have a much sturdier bracket. And we might even potentially be able to come like this on the side, and then we wouldn't even have to cut anything with that AC adapter. So I'm going to take some measurements and we're going to get to it. Alright, so it's looking like we're like 6 inches basically. We'll definitely want a little bit of overhang, so we'll call that 6 inches. I'm going to cut these pieces for either side here, then we'll come back and cut the side pieces. I have my 2 top pieces cut here, and as you can see, one of them is slightly longer than the other, and that will be for this side here. And then we have basically 2 sides done. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a measurement. It's going to be a little tricky because it's going to want to move. But I'm going to take a measurement from here to here and hope that they don't move. And then once that's done, I'm going to make a template out of tape for the top of this, and then mark the sides, and that way it'll be a lot easier to line everything up. So I got my micrometer here. I'm gonna take it back down to 0 and then 0 it out because I had it at 6 inches for the cuts of these two pieces here. Well, it was like 6 inches and a quarter. I'm just gonna do the these cuts in millimeters because all right, 5.791. 2 pieces cut. Let's see how we did. Man, that is pretty good. So what we'll do is I'll weld this here and then we'll kind of chop that at an angle to cut off the excess. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a template out of tape so we can make sure everything's square and it's not racked like this or racked like that when we go to weld it. Be able to just line it up with the template and then just get right to it. Okay, now I'm about to make the tape template, which is going to be pretty crucial in making sure everything's straight. I'm going to make sure I get good indications of where the sides end and where the corners are. Okay. Just marking the top there. Tape is taped that way. Oh. Okay, there's the template. I'm gonna place it onto this table. Template's stuck, which is surprising because this table is super old and dusty. It's not gonna be the most accurate thing in the world, but it will get us close enough to placing our pieces. So, as long as we are square, and we are square on the template, we will be good to go. Really got to get that edge lined up there nicely. Man, clean the whole garage, and now I'm already a freaking mess in here. Alright guys, wish me luck. Here we go. Record, but I grinded it. It's relatively smooth. Now we can transfer the template and drill the holes. So I'm gonna pull this template off. I used a white paint pen to mark the location of the holes. So now we're gonna use this transfer this over to our bracket here. And another thing is, realistically, we really only need like 2 of the holes as long as they're diagonal for this to work. We just need to secure it. It's not load bearing. It's not mounted. You know, the power supply is not going to be like that, only being held on by the bolts. It's going to be sitting like this, and the bolts are just simply basically keeping it in a position that we want it to be in. So we have our template laid out. I'm going to drill out these holes. Alright guys, we are back in the garage the next day, and now we are going to begin welding the posts for our power supply bracket. The power supply bracket is going to have slots for the holes because a wise man once told me, if you can't make it perfect, make it adjustable. So I'm going to be filing out the slots and drilling secondary holes and then filing out in between them so that I can move this around to get it to mount properly. I'm kind of rushing this stuff and it's making me make stupid mistakes. I really want to get this done so I can start building the PC, which is what I'm the most excited for. And I think I need to just kind of slow down and, you know, focus on what I'm doing. So the power supply is going to mount to this side of it, and it's going to go right down on top. Now, that means that we can't have these on this side. They have to be on the other side. So I will be flipping this around. We'll be using our ground clamp from the welder to hold things, which isn't really ideal, but I don't have a ton of clamps that are suited to this kind of work. And yeah, we gotta get done with the tools we have available. So I'm gonna go ahead and tack this on, and we'll see where we are after that. Okay, there we go, that one's on there. And that's kind of just a perfect example of how important prepping is. I need to invest in some better fabrication equipment. Alright, so now we'll let that cool, and we'll clean it up and then add it to the base. So I've got the base and the vise, and we're going to clean it up. Okay, now this is the front on this side, and we knew that the power supply connectors are here, so this needs to mount to this branch here. Now, what I'm going to do is that is still extremely hot. I'm going to get my magnetic level, and I'm going to hold it with the level, and then we'll just tack it in place whenever it is level. Probably something like that. Okay, for our purposes, that is definitely close enough. Looks like we have a functional power supply mount now. And a lot more cleanup to do and a lot more welding to do, but it's on there. Let's go. Now here's where it gets kind of thuggin', and that is our radiator mount. All right, guys, swap the view. We're gonna cut off 2 pieces just this length. That's pretty good for an eyeball. I think I'm even holding it a little bit. Sheesh. Okay. Now, these need to be placed from the measurement I took. We're going to be using the fans to hold up the radiator, and they're bolted in there, so I don't think that's going to be a problem to have the radiator sit on these posts being held up by the fans, which are bolted in, and then the 3D printed bracket at the top just to keep everything mounted. Make sure everything's super square and super level. Time to take some measurements. Okay. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay. Then they'll tuck up against the board. I'll 3D print a bracket that goes around the fans, and then when it'll go right over here, over here, over here, back and over. And where the fan will be, where it crosses over, it's going to be completely perforated. So that way, you know, it doesn't block airflow. And I think there's also an added benefit of this configuration, which was that some of that air, even though it's going to be coming through this way, blowing on the power supply, I do think it will have some cooling effect on the power supply, hopefully. Guys, so now that we have the very basic outline of our mounts, we're going to go through and weld everything and prep everything and get it all welded up. And then it's really time to start moving on to finishing. The shaping, we have a ton of work to do, but as I mentioned before, what the shaping is doing is we're really just knocking everything down to kind of like a flat plane so that we can come in with body filter and fill all these gaps and make it look smooth and nice. The amount of time it would take to grind and grinded weld is just simply not worth it. Everything's sturdy as heck. You know, none of these are going anywhere. So our only concern now is improving the aesthetic appeal of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm coming back to this tomorrow. I've already burnt myself like 10 times and drawn blood twice. So I'm going to come back to this tomorrow And I'm going to really start the shaving process. I'm probably going to go pick up some more Dremel bits because that one that I found actually does work pretty well, but they get dull pretty quick. So I'm probably going to go grab 2 or 3 of those just so that I can continue in an efficient manner. I don't want to be using a dull bit because this is already going to take a ton of time as it is. We got to get in places like in there and shape that and make that look pretty. So when we come over with the epoxy metal, we can shape it into something that looks organic and appealing. Like for this, we'll come in here and we'll sort of put a curve in here up to this and then knock this down. Well, it's already pretty flat, but we'll knock down the little bumps here so that when we come in with the epoxy and start sanding, that we can really smooth all of this out. And like this, we'll put a little arch here, cover from like here all the way down, all over this, and just make everything smooth and flat. So I'll be coming back tomorrow. See you guys in a second. All right, so I have no idea on earth how I forgot that I still needed a mount for the pump, but I'm just like mind boggled at my own foolishness right now. That was like the main focal point of the build. That's like building a car and forgetting the freaking suspension or the engine. Because I guess the motherboard would be like the engine, but whatever. This is like the heart of the build. It's going to be pumping the coolant just like, you know, human body heart does. And I forgot. So what I've done is I took the old bracket that came with this pump. I mentioned earlier in this build that this pump blocks the bracket that came with it from properly mounting. Or actually, that was in the previous video. So what I did, I'm gonna have to wrap this again and everything. But so what I did was I transferred the mounting holes to the bracket. I don't know if you can, holding it backwards, well. Yeah, hopefully you can see those gold paint pen marks, but they will line up here with the holes of the pump, and we're going to be using this to secure this to the case. We'll weld to the center of this, and that will hold up. It's much thicker steel than the bracket that came with it, so it's going to be a lot more secure. I have the screws that came with it. It looks like they are probably M4, maybe, definitely not M5. Those are definitely M4 or M3. So I'm going to drill out this. I'm going to make this bracket. All right. To the drill press, Batman. Okay, so here I have my angle iron, not angle iron, my flat stock that I'm going to be using to make this bracket. I have a center punch here that I just picked up from Ace Hardware. Shout outs to Ace. If you want to sponsor my video, holla at your boy. Love you guys. But I'm about to center punch the holes just so the drill bit doesn't walk. I actually restored this drill press as a side project. I filmed it, but I forgot to film the most crucial part, so I ended up not posting the video. But yeah, sanded it, painted it, all that. But this mechanism here has the drill bit, for some reason when you push it, it has a tendency to walk, and I think that has more to do with the low quality drill bits that I got from Ross than anything else. But I'm going to center punch the holes to try to prevent the drill bit from walking. So I'm going to go ahead and, I really need more light, pause. Okay, so I got my bracket here, and I've got my center punch. So I'm going to what I miss is I used to have a spring-loaded one, and that one was awesome. You just like, it's hard for me to line this up because of the lighting situation. Okay, now we're ready to drill. Don't buy drill bits from Ross. That's all I'm gonna say. Buy drill bits from Matco or Snap-on or another reputable company. Most likely your best bet is some company that creates machining equipment. Because I've drilled a total of 3 holes with that. And I mean, they're just shot, dude. So I'm going to replace that bit. And then I'll just chamfer the edges. Bro, I mean, come on, dude. Quality tools, guys. You never end up actually saving money when you buy the cheap tools. With the exception of certain things. All right, I'm going to show you guys something because I was a mechanic for a long time. And I have plenty of tools. Right? And I never really bought into the whole Snap-on thing. Just because, like, for things like sockets, it's just a hunk of metal, right? And you just need it not to break. But things like drill bits, you need them to be made out of a high-quality material. You need them to be sharp. And a cold-rolled drill bit or a forged drill bit is always going to outperform anything else. And that's probably not the correct terminology. I mean, probably every single drill bit ever is forged. Casting them would just be foolish. But I don't know. Drill bits and precision measuring equipment are something I always went high quality with, like the Matco stuff. Like, this is my go-to ratchet anytime I'm working on my vehicles, or I got the Ducati behind me. Anytime I'm wrenching on that, I go gear wrench. But high quality tools matter when you're doing fabrication work, as I've, hopefully if you learn something through this process, you realize that, like, with things like a welder or drill bits or measuring equipment, you want to spend the money to get a really quality piece for those type of items, because those type of items, you need a good one, right? So I'm all for saving a couple bucks when it comes to buying tools to do something that you want to do. But certain things you just can't cheap out on, drill bits being one of them. So we just ran through that like butter. Now we're going to shape this. And after we shape that, we are going to just double check the fit. Well, first I'm going to go ahead and chamfer these drillings and just make sure there's no sharp edges, and just make sure that it's a good clean job. And after I chamfer these, we're gonna round this off a little bit just to make it a little bit more appealing. We're gonna cut it. We're gonna take some measurements on the pump first, because one thing that I've learned during this process is measure 5 times and cut once, and also double check everything's in the right orientation. So I'm going to round this off and cut it wherever I measure to, probably something like that, just so that there's enough material after the bolt so we don't run into any problems, because relatively, it's going to be holding up a decent amount of weight, but this thickness is, for what we're doing, this thickness is probably like 5 or 6 times what we need, because this is the original bracket, and I mean, you can just see we're really beefing it up. So that's where I marked the holes. And the problem with this bracket is that there's nothing really to weld to. There's not really a good spot to weld something to support the weight. So I'm just making my own. And even with that, this does not fit on the pump that they made this bracket for. The pump blocks the bottom of this right here. Like the pump hits here. And then these holes are like about half the size off. Like the top of the hole comes to here instead of, you know, matching. So we're going to make our own, and we're going to make it better, and we're going to make it stronger. Guys, now I'm going to probably have to hold this light here by hand. But obviously before we go any farther with this, we're going to double check that the lines match up, or the holes match up. So, oh my gosh, look at that. Hopefully you guys can see that, but that is spot on. Let me see if I can zoom in even more. I mean, guys, hopefully you can see that, but that is just, I could not have got that better if I did this 10 times. That's beautiful. You gotta love it when something works according to plan. All right, now you can see that we really have plenty of space. And now at this time, before I cut it, I'm gonna kind of take a second to put things up and try to just see how they'll look and see the position and see if it might benefit us to maybe leave one side long and attach it at the side. Or I'm just gonna explore my options before I weld anything together. So I'm gonna do that now. Okay guys, so I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. Okay, so previously, we discussed about the motherboard and the locations of where the water blocks for the CPUs are going to be. And I came to the conclusion that I really want this to be quite low. And in addition to it being quite low, we do want to shift it this way. In the original concept sketches, I had it here right alongside, and that's most likely gonna prevent me from having enough room to put the Y fitting in and properly run the tubing. So I think what needs to happen is that it needs to be somewhere around here. This right here where I'm tapping is the outlet fitting. You can see it right there. And that, having it down here like this, should allow me enough space to come up at sort of a 45, because the Y will give me another 45, which will create a 90. And that will allow me to go straight up to the first water block, and then I can make whatever adjustments I need to reach the second. So I'm going to go ahead and get something. When I weld this, as sketchy as it is, and as much as I'm going to risk damaging this, I'm going to bolt this to the back of the pump, and I'm going to then tape everything except for the area that I'm welding. And I'll grab something for this to sit on that'll put it at the height and at the position that I want, and then I'm going to tack that into place. Okay, so what I need to do now is we now need to fabricate this bracket. We need to cut it, shape it a little bit, bevel these holes, and then we can move on to, again, the fabrication process that I completely forgot. Now, before we make our cuts, we're going to take some measurements. I'm going to zero out my calipers. And we've got our edge right there and our edge right there. We're working in millimeters because hot dogs per bald eagle is, I like millimeters better. But I like miles better. And also gallons. Oh my God. America. America. So it looks like we have a lip here. Okay, it's beveled. So we need to go a little bit past the bevel. And 90.15. It would have been cool if that was a round number, but whatever. Okay, so I think I'm going to measure. What What I'm going to do is just measure edge to edge of the holes and then add just a distance to the edge of that. 53.82. My gosh, that is spot on. That's crazy. Oh, it moved 0.01 of a millimeter, but that's nothing. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go, I'm going to lock it at a nice round number at a distance that I think will be fine and still be within this distance here to the edge of the bevel. So we're going to go to check what 11 millimeters looks like. I'm going to lock that real quick. So yeah, I like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the edge here. I'm going to make a mark with my caliper. Now, this is probably not the best practice. And then I'm going to make a mark with my paint pen. And we're going to make sure that's at a 90-degree angle. Okay, I see my mark now. Okay, and that's not going to be a perfect 90, marking it that way, but I'm also not going to be able to cut it at a perfect 90. So whatever variance there is from 90, we'll make that up with the grinder when we shape it. I am planning to round the corners and just, you know, just make it look a little bit better. So after that, we'll take one of these guys, and this bit is used to basically just go in here and then bevel the edges of the cut. I'll probably grab a smaller one than this, just so so I'll probably use, I have more of these, but I'll probably use one of these too. Let's check it out. All right, so I'm gonna swap the blade on the grinder, throw the vise back on the table, and yeah, get to cutting. All right, safety glasses on, safety 50th, and we are gonna. Now I cut it a little bit to the left of the line because we want some forgiveness when we go to shape it, and that way we'll be able to have some forgiveness if we can chase up to the line instead of having to worry about being completely accurate with the cut. Okay, it looks like we're gonna go like that. All right, there's our bracket so far. I'm gonna chalk it up in the vise again, and we are going to shape and round the corners with a flap disc, preferably one that's not brand new because that might remove material a little bit faster than I want to. All right, and there is our bracket. So I'm going to go grab the screws that came with this, and then we're going to bolt this on, and then just absolutely tape every single thing in multiple layers so we don't get any splatter that damages the acrylic. And then once I bolt that on, we'll grab an object of a uniform height that's square and then set this on top so we can get our distance for the mount. And then just make sure that we aren't going to have any interference issues with the motherboard or the GPU. And, we'll kind of just hold that stuff up with the GPU plugged in and make sure that everything clears and everything's good. Because the last thing we want is to do all this work and then go to put it together and the GPU is just knocking into the into the pump. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it here. And then we're going to drill out all the posts, mount the motherboard with the GPU, and see what we're working with there. And then if we need to make any changes to this, we will. But measuring that stuff in 3D space and not being able to hook it up to the motherboard, the measurements won't be accurate. It won't make sense. So I am going to start to get to work on this. I need to find... This should be pretty good, actually. Okay, guys, we are back at my desk, and now we are going to begin the process of beginning to mark the case for the locations which we need to drill in order to mount the motherboard standoffs to the case, which the motherboard will then bolt to. So I have all of the standoffs hooked up to the motherboard, and in the previous video I placed drops of paint onto the bottom of the standoffs and then placed that onto a template. Now, instead of making a template, we're just going to use the motherboard directly. I'm going to put paint on the bottom of the standoffs and then I'm going to place it onto the posts. And the reason I'm going to do it that way is because the template has its paper, right? So it can fold and give and bend, and that will mean an inaccurate result. And we really only have one shot at this if we want to do it in a way that we're not going to have to finagle some stuff and kind of MacGyver things together. So the standoffs will be epoxied in. Ideally, I can drill them and tap them, and I'll be able to just place some epoxy on the standoff threads and then bolt them in. But it's building something in 3D space is complex, and unless you have some pretty high dollar fabrication equipment, it's really hard to keep things perfect and straight and aligned and everything. So I'm going to do the best I can, and we're going to start this process by grabbing this paint pen and then placing dots on the bottom of all the motherboard standoffs. If you watched the previous video, you've already seen this process, so I'm not going to film it. But you will see the process of me placing the motherboard down onto the posts to see where they need to end up. Okay, so we have several extremely clean holes. We have some that are not so clean, and we're just gonna have to do this until we get it right. Luckily, this paint and these paint pens, it's water soluble. It's not oil based, so be able to get it off easily. All right, attempt number, what is this, 6, 7? Okay. I think this worked. Look at that. Yes, dude. Beautiful. This is the only one that's questionable, but it looks like we got our mark here. On the end, this one's right up to the edge. Okay, so now I'm going to take my center punch and I'm going to punch all of these. And we're going to drill the hole oversized and then epoxy the standoffs in. And then once we drill it out, we'll put the standoffs back on the motherboard, place epoxy inside the holes, and then let the motherboard down. Okay, that's probably about what it needs to be for down here. Now comes the scariest part. The next scariest part, we're just seeing if the holes line up. Ah! So I'm going to set it up how it was before. Put short standoffs on the top, long standoffs on the middle and the bottom, and pray to God that this works out. Because I've put so much work into this and so much time, and I'm really excited to build this computer, and I really don't want to be held up by anything else. So, go ahead and lay it down there. Get that marker out of the way, get that jounce out of the way. This is what we're using to epoxy the standoffs. I've taken it out of the case. I've showed you guys this before in the previous video. It says it sets in 5 minutes and cures in an hour. So the directions for this stuff are basically you just snap this part off, throw this thing on, and then you're ready to go. So I'm going to place the motherboard behind me, ready to go since we only have 5 minutes. I'm going to snap, fill each hole, and then place the motherboard down. And I'm going to try to avoid putting too much epoxy. Okay, I need to use a tool with this. Okay. All right, guys, here goes nothing. Okay, the most crucial part of all, placing the motherboard. I'm gonna try to be really careful with this. Now, obviously, we don't want to get any of this adhesive on the motherboard itself. And so as long as, okay, so I'm going to be completely honest with you guys always. And some of these bolts are a little kicked to the side, but as long as it's not, the angle's not too extreme and the screw is in, it's going to hold it in a position that when the epoxy is done, the motherboard can still bolt to. And we're not talking anything crazy like a 40, I mean, we're talking probably like, a few degrees kicked off at an angle. So we'll be all right. Now, no epoxy on the motherboard so far. Everything is in and down. We're gonna have to build up with the JB Weld epoxy in a couple of places. But so far it is looking good. It's looking relatively straight to the base, which I'm pleased with. And this is probably the most crucial part of this build. Maybe I should have worked it up a little, built it up a little bit more to give you guys some more cinematic view. Oh man, but it's in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys a better view of some of the standoffs. All right guys, here we are back in the garage after a super exciting moment of mounting the motherboard to the stand. You can see it looks awesome. Super excited about this. Now, if you remember, the reason that I decided at this point to mount the motherboard instead of after the other fabrication was done is because this is going to allow me to basically place the pump more accurately in 3D space. And it will also allow me to know exactly where my bends will need to end up. It'll allow me to see where the pump is in relation to the other components so that I don't accidentally mount it in a place where we have to basically make like impossible bends to get to here or have the angles be too sharp. So now that the motherboard is mounted and that's looking good, I have a little bit of an update, and that is that I've decided to go with a remote GPU mount. I have the PCIe cable. I just ordered that from Amazon. It should be here on Monday. And that is going to allow us to place the GPU at the back of the case, the chassis, whatever you want to say. And I think that's really going to clean up the look because I love the way it looks right now. And then having the tubing maybe do some, some interesting bends to end up at these water blocks will definitely add some aesthetic appeal. Now, this PC is not going to have any other hard drives, solid state or otherwise, besides the M.2 SSD, which is just going to hold the operating system, the GPU packs, as well as XMRig. Not quite sure if I'm going to set this up to go into my main Monero wallet or if I'm just going to create a whole nother wallet for mining. I'm not sure on that yet, but that will all be included in the setup video that we're going to do at the end of this series. So the GPU poses some challenges, as does the resource monitor, which I have not received yet. I thought it was a Prime item, and it's been like a week or at least a week, and I still haven't got it yet. And it looks like it's going to take about a month to get here, which is crazy, but it is what it is. And without that, it's really hard to mock something up. Although I can come up with a solution that should be able to mount pretty much anything. It's a little bit crude. It involves using some form of adhesive to attach a metal plate to the resource monitor that will then house a neodymium magnet, and then just a post comes out from here with a flat plate, and then the resource monitor would just attach to that via that magnet. But I have to do a little bit of research into that and to see if that's even plausible or if it will cause issues with the screen and its internal components of the resource monitor. So the problems that we're going to be solving today in addition to the water pump mount, is the remote mount for the GPU. So just to give you guys an example, I'm going to grab the power supply and the radiator real quick and be right back. Okay, so as you guys know, the radiator will be pushed all the way tight to the case. And it will be held in position by a 3D printed bracket that will clip to this post here and this post here via a 3D printed bracket to anchor it in and hold it. And the weight will be supported by the being honest, the crude mounts that we made. The power supply will be right here. And we know the cables are going to have to come up over here, right? And we know at the bottom of this, we have to plug in the AC power. So this kind of posed a challenge for me. And I was kind of like, well, man, where am I going to put the GPU remotely? I can't really put it underneath here because not only will it be exposed to sight being underneath these components that come to the bottom of the motherboard, but I also need to plug in the AC here. And I don't really want to put anything underneath here because then people will be able to see it and it won't be as clean. So the solution that I came up with is I'm going to make a bracket that holds the GPU right about here. And the cable is going to be on this side. So it's either going to be here or it's going to be here. I haven't exactly decided which one yet, but I'm voting more on this side just because the PCIe connectors will be right next to the power supply, and the connection on the motherboard is on this right side where the radiator is. So I'm thinking I'm going to extend this with a plate and make a custom bracket that can bolt this thing in with this tab here on the left side and this tab here on the right side. It will be an L bracket of sorts, and that way we'll be able to just put it right there, leave some space in between the radiator and the GPU. And I do kind of have to work that out to see how much space. I'm going to do a little bit of research and see if that could cause any negative cooling effects with the radiator. But I think it should be all right. The radiator is going to be pulling fresh air in from this side and blowing it this way. I think that could have a beneficial cooling effect for the power supply, but I'm not sure 100% on if that's going to cool it at all, just because it will obviously be exhausting relatively hot air. It all depends on how efficient the cooling loop is, and the loop's going to be pretty long. So my kind of like working thinking is that by the time the coolant gets to the radiator, it'll already be a few degrees colder, and by the time it exits the radiator, it should be pretty cool. So, you know, I'm not quite sure on exactly how effective that's going to be, or if I should kind of change that design a little bit and maybe print some 3D printed air ducts that'll somehow exhaust the air away from the power supply. But I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. But the one thing I don't want to do is overheat my graphics card. And this graphics card is cheap and it's old, and I don't really care if I lose it, but I don't want to have to re-weld the case for another solution if I have to get a different graphics card. So I'm going to do a little bit of research, see how effective this solution would be. But regardless, if I have to move it out more to here, it's most likely going in this spot. So that's what we're going to be working on today, and I think we're going to start with the pump. So let's get to it. All right, guys, so it's a couple of days later. I was last working on the remote GPU mount and started by welding sort of a platform, and then I decided that I needed to come up with a better solution, and this is the solution that I've come up with. So this is a remote GPU mount from Amazon. I'll show you guys how it goes together downstairs. But the important thing about this one is that it is magnetic. So instead of having to grind off this nice finish and weld this, I'll simply be able to build a platform for it and then just click it into place. And then that will hold the GPU securely. We have our extension right here, so that will naturally mount to the platform here. And that is where our GPU will mount. I have to go back and look at exactly how this thing puts together. I didn't have it memorized, but we have all of our hardware here. Came with a screwdriver, and this is, I'm assuming, where it goes and it mounts to, but it could be I can't remember. I looked it up online. I should have done that probably before I shot this video. I need to get my shit together, but this is going to be our GPU mounting solution. Now here is the real exciting part, and that is, here is our resource monitor. If you take a look, this is one of the themes, and it's absolutely badass. Has a ton of cool themes. I will link it in the description. It was a little pricey. It was over $100, but well worth it. And let me move this nonsense out of the way real quick. And as you guys know from the concept drawings, this is going to go right here. And that's going to allow me to monitor the performance of this miner while I'm sitting at my workstation that's right next to this desk. And that way, I'm definitely going to have to rearrange the desk, but it's going to allow me to have this sit up here in mining, and I'll be able to see critical information about the performance, as well as I believe I can potentially configure this screen to actually show the XMRig application on it here, so I can, at a glance see my hash rate and all that. So the only thing that we have to be concerned about with this screen is that the cables come out of the side and it plugs into the USB header here. So that is going to cause some aesthetic issues that we're going to have to solve. But luckily everything is on the right side of the monitor, and that's really going to allow the water pump and the tubing coming off of that to sit in front of these cables and just hide them to the best of our ability. As you guys know, with any PC build, you're going to have some cables visible. So we're going to do the best we can to hide them and make everything look clean, but there will be a couple cables that you can see from the front, and that's okay. We know computers have wires. We would prefer not to see them, but sometimes you have to. Okay, guys, so here we are back in the garage, and I'm starting to mock up the remote GPU mount, which I at first set on here with magnets, the magnets that are included with it. And you can see we line up pretty much perfectly with this post here, as well as this post here. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come off of here with an angle iron, with some flat stock straight out, and then just weld that there, and potentially just come out of that round stock right to here, and then this thing will be fully supported. And it won't look the most beautiful. It won't look the most, professionally engineered, but it will be functional. And I'm just so excited for you guys to see this after I do all the sculpting, because I know it just looks so rough now. But I promise you by the time I'm done, it's going to look cool. So I'm going to go ahead and start taking some measurements and start getting this thing ready to mount our GPU remotely. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and cut this piece of flat stock to size. I'm just going to mark it using the piece I just cut. And then at some point during this build, we're going to be shaping all of these hard corners. Those posts for the radiator to sit on, they're pretty level. This is kicked up a bit, but when I put the other piece down, we'll be able to level that off, so it doesn't really matter, it's at an angle. And I vow to you guys that I'm going to increase my fabrication skills, because we are going to make a V2 of this case, and I already have a ton of ideas for it that will make the fabrication process be a lot more accurate, as well as just the design is better than this one. It might not be sort of like as cool of an idea, but it's going to make it much more accurate and much more precise, and require a lot less welding, which for me is definitely something that I should be doing. So I'm going to chalk these cut pieces into the vise, clean them up with the wire wheel, and get ready to weld them to the back. Okay, and now this is something that I'm going to have to look at from the side to ensure it's like as level as I can get it. But the level, I mean, yeah, it would be nice to get everything perfectly square and perfectly level, but it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I mean, as long as it's functional, I mean, that's good for me. It would be nice to have the fabrication skills to make everything beautiful and perfect, but at this point in time, I just don't have them. That might have been my first decent weld of the entire build series. Okay, looking good. Now we're gonna chop that off at the edge. Maybe we'll leave a little bit, you know what, actually I'm gonna leave that for now, just because I do have to find a spot to mount this for the radiator fans, and maybe something like that would be cool, because the fan, well, that's probably too close. The fans are right here. Maybe up here. I'll figure something out for that. Because, like, also what I could do is there's like a side plate for the GPU bracket, so I could just mount it right there on that. It's got adhesive on the back. All right, let's get these welds cleaned up, see what we're working with. And how the bracket mounts. Beautiful, look at that. That's got some strength to it. These magnets are strong magnets. They'll lift the whole case up pretty much. Obviously the magnetic effect is weakened a little bit because the metal is still quite hot. Okay, let's check the clearance of our power supply. And we are cleared. That is beautiful. We got clearance for our power supply. Our GPU is going to mount on this side, so there'll be space for the fan to still pull in cold air. and the GPU will exhaust this way, so it'll help draw heat away from that power supply. This is looking good. Okay, GPU mount is done. Bang, bang. Okay, now comes one of the harder mounts, which is the resource monitor on the bottom. Now, in order to mount that properly, we're gonna have to, probably it would be best to mount the motherboard. I think one thing I could do is just measure the motherboard from the mounting holes in the center down to the bottom of the motherboard, and that will give us an idea of how much past here it'll come, and then we can effectively place our resource monitor. Okay guys, so now we're gonna go ahead and mount the motherboard. I was gonna just measure from the bottom of it, but in addition to that, I want to make sure I know the thickness that it is from the thickness off of the standoffs, because the last thing we want is to try to mount our resource monitor and then have a bunch of have it sit basically not flush with the motherboard and be like behind it. If anything, we want the resource monitor to protrude slightly. Motherboard mounts flawlessly, and we're gonna throw all of the screws in the top and only a couple on the bottom, because we really just need to sort of hang it from the chassis. Okay, so here is our monitor. Now, this actually works. We almost want to shift it here so that our cables are going to be behind the pump. But the problem with that is if the pump ends up here, the tubes are going to cover the monitor. So we actually need to put it off center here. And we're going to want it at a slight angle, something like that. So I think the first step for me here is to use painter's tape and make a template of the mounting holes. We have 4 mounting holes here, and that'll give us a nice secure connection to the chassis. So I'm gonna make a template real quick. Okay, I'm gonna tape off the front of this as well, just to be extra safe. It does have the film still on it, but I just don't know if that's gonna be enough. And the last thing we want is to spend $150 on a resource monitor and then have it break during fabrication. So now what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna trace off this edge here. So I'm just gonna take this razor blade and carefully cut that tape. And so now, in order to get these impressions, I'm gonna start pressing down, and you can see, hopefully you can see that one formed right away. Okay, so that's our template. I'm gonna remove this and place it onto this flat stock, and that's gonna form our mounting system. So I wanna make sure I get these centered onto this piece. So I'm gonna start by sticking one here. I'm actually gonna cut it here so I can get a better visual on where that piece is in relation to the material. Okay, now I am going to take this over to the drill press. First I'm gonna center punch it on this table. Oh man, I just realized you guys couldn't see that whole process. Whack. So I laid the tape onto the template, and now I'm gonna center punch all of these holes and then transfer that to the drill press, where I will then drill out all of the holes. Holes are all center punched. We're going to drill them larger than the holes on the thing because we have the head of the screw is rather large. So we'll be able to get away with them being slightly off center. You got 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, we're going to take our beveler and bevel the edges, give it a nice clean look as well as deburr it. All right, so the bolts that come with this are obviously going to be shorter. Now, 3 mounting points for this is more than enough. And we have plenty of adjustability in our holes. And that is good because that way when we mount it to the case, if we're not perfectly level, we actually have quite a bit, this is the best way to illustrate it, we have quite a bit of adjustability to make it level, which is good. Because I'm sure you guys know, seeing my fabrication skills, that anytime I can factor in some adjustability, it's going to benefit me greatly. So what I'm going to do before I take it off here is I'm going to mark where I'm going to cut this. Okay, that is marked. We can go ahead and pull it out. Now, I could use these nice machine head screws. I would just need to add a couple washers, but not quite sure on that yet. All right, so there's our bracket. Gonna chop it, and now we'll start setting up the mount. And this is really exciting, guys, because once this mount is done, it's time to shape and sand, baby. Okay, so in all my infinite wisdom, I completely forgot to hit the record button. I made the cuts on either side, and now we're going to use a duller flap disc, an older one, so that we can round off the corners and it won't be too aggressive in removing material. Okay. Now it's time for the hard part. It's time to figuring out how we need to position and where these welds need to end up in order to mount this where we need it. I'm gonna go get the hardware. I'm gonna go get the hardware for this, and that way we can mount it to our bracket. Alright guys, so interestingly enough, the hardware that came with it only has 3 bolts. So I guess we made the right decision on doing it that way, because I guess even the manufacturer thinks you only need 3, which makes sense. Now my only worry is that these bolts are not going to be long enough to go through the flat stock and into the thing, in which case we will have to beautiful. All right, guys, I like it right there. Let me hold up the pump. Try to make sure that the tubing has enough room. Yeah, I think we're good on the tubing. It might come across here. All right, now I just need to figure out a way. You know, what would be cool is if I 3D printed something that I could use to hold it, but I just don't have that available now. And it looks bad, but look at that. No damage at all. Except for, like, obviously the adhesive to the tape kind of melted. But tape does its job. Beautiful. We got our bracket up there. Guys, I'm hyped! Guys, this is the last step before we really start finishing out the case. And admittedly, that's going to take forever. But this is a huge step. Okay, now we're going to finish welding. And dude, all of the fabrication of the case will be done besides the shaping. And that is incredibly exciting. Heck yeah, America. Okay, I just realized how dumb it was to just do that weld with the motherboard attached. I'm just too excited, bro. I need to chill out. Alright guys, I think this is going to wrap up part 2, and part 3 will be all the shaping and sanding and sculpting with the putty. Try to give this a really cool shape. Let me turn this off. So I've been doing some research into sort of artificially intelligently designed 3D printed metal structures and how they have a really organic, unique shape to them. And I'm going to try to bring some of that aesthetic into the sculpting process of the case. And this is what I'm the most excited for, because it's going to cover all of my bad welds and it's going to make it look so cool. And I'm so excited for it. And I'm really excited to share this with you guys and, you know, just bring this into reality. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this upstairs along with the GPU and the resource monitor and any of the hardware that we need. And we're going to kind of just sort of throw it together. And when we do the assembly process, when everything's painted and sculpted and all that, that's when I'll create that 3D printed bracket to hold the radiator in. But guys, at this point in time, besides the sculpting, all of the actual base fabrication is done. And that is an amazing feeling. So let's get this thing upstairs and let's assemble it. Okay guys, so I got Hulk off to the side over here and the other components over here while I build the mount to the GPU. So it looks like we have this piece. Okay. And I don't know if these holes are threaded. Okay, so there has to be some nuts. It's clear that this goes here because there's 3 holes here and 3 holes there. So I'm going to take a look and we're going to dump out our hardware here and sort it. So I guess this does have to be threaded. Yes, okay, it is threaded. It's a little rough, but whatever. So, I'm going to get that. Okay, now we got that slid back. Now let's take a look at our GPU. And then when we get that mounted nicely, Okay, I think I'm going to have to take off the shield. Okay, the shield is off. Wow, that's actually beautiful. Oh man, guys. I'm telling you, that looks dope. Okay. Now our only worry is if we need to order a longer one of these extensions or not. So I'm going to tighten this down where it is because it looks awesome here. And then we'll place it on the back and see if the extension reaches. And if not, it's not a big deal. We just need a longer extension. Where did I put my... Okay. Okay, that'll be fine. Okay. Now let's clear this stuff off. And we are going to take advantage of that bracket with the fan header. I'm going to set this off to the side. We're going to naturally save and hoard all of this hardware because you can never have too much hardware. Yeah, that's not even going to be close. Okay, so we need a much longer extension, or we need 2 of these. But that's going to be nice because it's going to slip right in front of these headers on the bottom here. It's going to slip above these headers and kind of hide our other wires that we need to plug into here and mount right to this one right here. So now let's mount up the pump and the metrics display. Okay, that's an Allen head. It doesn't look level because it's not bolted yet, and I'm gonna have to file this one down a little bit to give us more adjustability. Time for the pump. So one thing I will have to do for the resource monitor here is I'm going to have to file this hole downwards to give us just a little bit more adjustability. It's just not quite there. It's got about 1 millimeter to go. And by taking a file and filing that hole and making it basically like a slot, I'll be able to rack that resource monitor and get it perfectly level to the bottom of the motherboard. Now, this water pump is cool. I think in the future, when I do 0.2, I'm going to want it out here and up and almost level with the motherboard. The face of it, not level with the motherboard, but just enough so that this sticks out enough so that I can come over like this, down and out, and then up and then over and then tee off to each one. Because if you take a look at the tees here, okay, that's not a tee. Here's one. Now, if you take a look at the T here, we're going to have to figure out where this is going to end up here so that I can just go straight to either side of the water blocks. And that's going to require a lot of measurement. And most likely the best thing to do is to kind of just position the T and come from the CPUs to the T, where it will then come to one one tube out and into the pump, and that way that will be a lot easier to bend. But it's looking like the T is going to end up somewhere like that. So it's going to be a super fun project. It's going to be a blast, and I'm really excited for it. But before we get to all that, we have a lot of sanding, a lot of grinding, and a lot of sculpting to do on this case before it looks good. In addition to that, we're going to have to round these corners off just to make that look better, because right now it doesn't look clean. Obviously, there's a ton of weld spatter all over it. But right now, I mean, we are finished with all major fabrication, and the only thing we have to worry about now is getting a long enough PCIe extension in order to feed our graphics card. And I've left enough room here that the extension can come through and go in, and I think that's just going to look awesome. I think that's going to look so cool, and I'm thinking about trying to find a purple one. So, thank you so much for watching, guys. That's going to do it for part 2. And in part 3, it's going to be shaping, painting, and doing the final touches like filing out that hole, coming up with a solution to mount this. Because I didn't factor into the account that there's not really a good way to tighten this bolt with this thing blocking it. So most likely that's either going to get cut out or just moved at a sharper angle to this side. And we're going to miss out on some of that triangulation strength because, I mean, it's rock solid. I mean, it doesn't flex at all with that triangular brace. And before I put that in there, it did. So keep in mind, guys, that we're going to be going, when we sculpt the case, for an organic shape like this. And that is a artificial intelligence designed 3D metal print optimized for strength and stiffness. So we're going to be going for that sort of look, that organic shape. Nothing too hard. And in order to achieve that on the back here, what we're going to do is sort of bring these out and then come down at an angle and bring it out here and then come back and just do some cool organic looking shapes. And in addition to that, if you take a look here where the standoffs weren't level and there's some of the threads exposed, we'll be building the post up around the standoff to about there. And that's going to be a challenge in and of itself. And the sculpting is going to take a long time, guys. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to take a long time. But we're going to get it done, and we're going to make this thing look amazing. And I'm super excited for the finished product with the radiator and the power supply mounted. So I definitely got some shopping to do, find a long enough extension. Because if you look here, I mean, this thing, it isn't even close. It's not even close to being close. So, got some shopping to do, but if you guys are looking to support the build and you really want to see it finished, I do take Monero donations. The wallet address will be posted in the description. And if you want a product in exchange for supporting the build, I have some really cool digital art that I've done inspired by this build, and I have a lot more digital art coming. Or you can go ahead on Crazy Cyber and just pick up one of the physical products that we have available. Any dollar spent on the website goes right back into the channel to produce more content for you guys. And in these next couple of videos, I'm really going to be looking to ramp up my production quality. I really want to focus on honing my editing skills and really creating some really high quality content so you guys can enjoy it more. And I hope that, you know, as the channel continues to grow, I really step it up with the production value and give you guys some really high quality videos. I think I have a ton of good ideas for content, but I think my video skills need to catch up with my ideas. So, Virgil Crazy Cyber, logging off. Hope you have a good night.